Okay, everybody, thanks very much for coming to this session after lunch. It's always a difficult shift, and I appreciate you all being here. We're going to be talking about developing global competence, and we're going to start, Ceri and I, talking about how we became interested in this topic. And then we're going to show you, hopefully, in this very quick half-an-hour session, some practical ways that you can adopt global competence in classroom tasks. My interest in the topic came because I'm a coursebook writer, and I'm interested in cultural content, interested in the ways that we present cultural content. And I found that a lot of doing some research into global competence, I found that lots of the central ideas behind it, don't worry if you're not sure what it is yet, it's not very complicated, but some of the central ideas behind it really struck a chord with me when preparing cultural content, choosing cultural texts and deciding what kinds of questions to ask about these texts. It also seems to me that this is a good topic to talk about in this current time when the trend in the world is towards isolationism. It seems to me to be important to discuss this kind of thing. And we're not the only ones talking about this topic at this conference, in fact. A number of people are also talking about similar areas. So Ceri, how about you?
Yeah, so I think I have kind of a three-pronged interest in global competences. One, I work with and at secondary schools in Spain. And so as you'll see in a minute, this is very much something that is coming into the curriculum, a competence that's required. I'm a parent. I have two bicultural teenagers in my house, and that kind of gives me another slant on it. But also, I kind of feel very much, and at the moment, with all kinds of threats to our identity, that I'm very much a product of a lot of different cultures, albeit all European. But so there's definitely three personal and professional interests for me in this topic.
Okay, so let's move on to discussing what it is. I know there's a lot of information on that first slide, but if you look up global competence, and especially in relationship with language teaching, you'll come across this document from the OECD. And essentially, the reason that it's important at the moment is because PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, they are considering global competence as a skill to be assessed for 15-year-olds, so particularly for the teen age group for the next couple of years. So this is one of the reasons why it's suddenly kind of on the agenda, an unexpected agenda as well. If you think about it, quite difficult to assess these skills. If you'll notice here that according to the PISA document, that the skills that are assessed are analytical and critical thinking and the knowledge understanding of global issues. Whereas these attitudes obviously are very difficult impossible to assess because they're attitudes. But let's say these are components, these are attitudes that we should be fostering in the materials that we create. However, dividing this idea of global competence into skills, knowledge and understanding, and attitudes, I did a bit of research. I was thinking, where does this come from? In actual fact, this is nothing new in reality. It's a new umbrella term. It's a convenient, all-encompassing term. But in fact, if you go back in the literature, you'll find from this article by Kip Cates from Global Education that he describes global education exactly in the same way. In other words, you have what he defines as knowledge about world, countries, and cultures, and about global problems, skills of critical thinking, cooperative problem solving, seeing issues from multiple perspectives. I think that's very important. And then he finishes with attitudes of global awareness, cultural appreciation, respect for diversity, and empathy. These are very, very similar, if not identical, in fact, to the central ideas behind as global competence is defined by the OECD or in the PISA document. So I think that's quite interesting that I don't think it should be something that you think, oh, this is something new that I have to apply overnight. These are things that a lot of us have believed in for quite a long time. It's just a different way of highlighting this and in a new context, which is the PISA context. So how can we, as we've only got half an hour, That's the kind of the end of the theory. How can we practically apply these ideas in the class? And I was reading an article by Thorsten Meze. He's there in the fourth row. He will be talking later. I'll mention him again because he'll be talking in this room in about 2 or 3 hours' time on a topic related with global competence. And he established a binary that I find very useful when we attempt to embrace this big umbrella topic, global competence. And what he did was he kind of created this binary of visualizing the global and globalizing the visual. So in terms of visualizing the global, what we mean is we have a global problem that we tend to visualize. So for example, if I say to you climate change, what image comes to your mind? Just talk to the person next to you for a minute. What common images comes to your mind when you think of climate change?
Have to move them on quite quickly. Yeah.
Is it something like that? Is that the image that comes to your mind, perhaps? Could be. So this is an old postcard of a glacier. This, we can analyze this. We could. I'm very fond of analyzing images, but we could analyze it for a long time, probably. Where does this image come from?
What would it look like today?
Yeah, exactly. So obviously, what you would find, perhaps, in a climate change. An article about climate change is this old postcard, and then what it is today, before and after, let's say. That would be perhaps a quite intellectual way to explain this or to visualize the problem, to embody the problem. But what would be a much more popular way? There are many. In fact, I noticed in Lindsay and their talk, in Jill's talk, they had a little icon of the world kind of on fire. And sinking. So this is again, another kind of iconic representation. But something like this, did anybody come up with the polar bear? Yeah? Yeah. No. How many people did think of the polar bear? Was it like this polar bear? Yeah. This is the polar bear that we found on Pixabay, Creative Commons images. So
we had to find a free polar bear.
Yeah.
Which is difficult.
Which is not easy. There was one particular polar bear that we wanted, which was the kind of polar bear that Thorsten had in mind as well, which is a very cute, fluffy polar bear, sort of, in the middle of this climate, this landscape where all the ice flows and icebergs are melting and so on. The important thing about these kinds of questions is, does this really represent the problem? This is the image that is, let's say, the popular icon of climate change. This is the visualization of this issue. But does it trivialize that issue? Does it make it comfortable for us, the fact that it's a polar bear? Can we think of an alternative image? Another less fluffy, cuddly animal in a less attractive landscape. See what I mean? These kinds of questions, perhaps the right kinds of questions we should be asking when we consider this idea of visualizing the global. How do we visualize these global problems or global issues? Kerry?
Okay, so apologies for the fuzzy image, but one of the problems that we have, of course, with images and visualizing in general is that a lot of them are copyrighted. And we can't use them. So this is a photo taken in my kitchen. We have a huge map of the world on the wall in the kitchen. And for me, since I was a kid as well, we had a map of the world in the kitchen. Every single flat I've lived in my life, I think, has always had a map of the world somewhere. And I think the map, it's a great starting place with kids, especially if we're looking at the younger secondary school, that they initially just find themselves on the map. Okay, now actually where I live, we're very much on the map because we're at the southernmost, well, it might be the the southernmost tip of Europe. And on a beach that's about 40 minutes drive away, we can watch the lights come on in Africa as the sun sets. So we live very much on the map. And maps are wonderful things to work with. I don't know if you know, but maps are very problematic. You can't put a map into published materials. Maps are incredibly political. So we need, as teachers, to take our own maps in. And it's better to take our own maps in, because each part of the world will have a different take on the map as well. So there's one of the things that you can do, again, with the younger kids, the maybe 11, 12-year-olds at a low level of English, is to explore time zones. So this is a piece of material that we wrote for a course book that does exactly that. We're talking about learning the time. So we have the times across the world and the stories of kids of their age across the world at these different times. It's amazing how many kids have never thought about the fact that the time is different. Even in Spain, where we have 2 time zones, in fact, and the news constantly reminds people that is such a time in Madrid and another time in the Canaries. But it's still a new concept for the kids to think of themselves as being in one time zone and another time zone existing, and how far away those are. So placing the kids on the map. And another thing that I like to do is to actually get physically, with pins and string, we make connections across the map. I work with very homogeneous groups where maybe 90% of the kids were born in the same town as their grandparents. But there are connections that they can make as well. Maybe they have a cousin who's working in a bar in London, or maybe their football hero actually comes from Buenos Aires or from Rio. And so any kind of connection, so that they can see from their point in the map the connections that can be made all over the world. Okay.
So we spoke about visualizing the global. How about globalizing the visual? This again comes from Torsten's article, which really inspired me. But I really like this binary because of the cleverness of this kind of the concept, in the sense that when we talk about globalizing the visual, I'm going to show you an image now. Let's hope this link works. All you need to do is to think about events, current events, and how these images here we go. So this is one that I remember. I don't know if any football fans here. That Afghan. This is in Spanish, but an Afghan child that was photographed wearing a plastic bag, basically blue and white stripes. The typical color of a plastic bag in many countries of the world happens also to be the strip of the Argentinian national team. So he, with the very little material that he had available to him, he made his own shirt and wrote Messi on it. This then, of course, went viral. This became a viral image, and so much to the extent that then he did actually meet Messi in a special event in Dubai. In other words, this is an example. Think about any events that have taken place. The terror attack recently in Westminster, that's a typical circumstance where certain images become iconic, viral, and represent this. So this is an example of globalizing the visual. Yeah, so making the visual image explaining necessarily this problem, this event, or this circumstance will be remembered because of this visual representation. And this is the world we live in today. So I think that's also very important to remember. So I'm going to give you a little example. Let's do a little task. I'm going to show you a image, and I want you to tell me, this is a good example of globalizing the visual, I think. Where is this place? And I think very relevant today. Is this a clue? Very relevant to be looking at this image today. Where is this place? What are the people doing? This is working on your prior knowledge. How do you know? Okay, so let me just show you this image. Okay, just for the person next to you. Some of you may know immediately because of your prior knowledge, yeah? Some of you will have no idea. Just for a couple of minutes, where is this place? Okay, with the person next to you. Where is this place? What are the people doing? How do you know?
People are dying to talk.
Huh?
People are dying to talk.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. go back to the questions?
Yeah, I'll say them again. Just to tell you that, repeat the questions again, okay? Where is this place? What are the people doing? How do you know? Okay? How do you know? Again, that's important. What's the evidence for that? He's got an advantage.
I'm just going to give the answers.
Yeah, I'm going to... Oh, do you think so, yeah?
We're on the mic.
Yeah. Ask a couple of people.
Ask a couple of people.
Okay, anyone like to... Some people know. How many people know, absolutely know, based on their prior knowledge? Okay, so that's... Put your bit as if you want to touch the ceiling. Okay, that's about 4 or 5. Okay, that's interesting. Not that many. How many people have a good idea? Think they have a good idea? Okay, good. All right. Anyone with a good idea, would you like to tell us what you think? Because people who know, they know. But I'm interested in the process of getting to... Yeah.
Someone with a good idea there.
Yeah.
Just from the look of it and the Tecate sign, it tells me it's probably Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Yay! Yes.
Barrier there, so we could make the next step and say they're clearly playing volleyball.
Yeah.
And
Put the ball.
maybe the other side could be South Texas or New Mexico or Arizona, and they're playing border volleyball.
Okay.
10 out of 10.
Exactly. Let's go back to the presentation. How many people agree with him? Yeah? Okay. This is, in fact, the context. It's actually Naco, Sonora, and Naco, Arizona. I wouldn't have expected you to know that. It's interesting that many border towns have the same name. This is the locals are using the US-Mexico border fence as a giant volleyball net. We haven't got time to go into more detail, but obviously you can see that net is quite strange. Yeah, it looked quite strange. So then the question to develop global competence, we haven't really covered. I think we need to go into a little bit more. I need to extend those questions, that exploitation. So I would then say these would be the initial questions, and then these two here, which we've already looked at, and then the next two, I think is where we're getting really to sort of the nitty-gritty. Is there anything surprising or unusual about it? Evidence. So is there anything unusual about that image? That image is a powerful image, yeah? But it's powerful for what reason? It's on the border, which at the moment is particularly...
Because of our context now.
Because of the context now. But how does it compare with other images of such places? And that's what you need to do to think of all... This is essential to kind of critical thinking, isn't it? Thinking of alternatives. What other images of other borders have you seen? Or of this border, how many of those images are like that image?
And remember that multiple perspectives is part of the PISA global competence. So it's being able to look at things from a lot of different angles and training kids into thinking about things in different ways rather than just taking the first impression.
So I think that this is an interesting example of an image that surprises us or is unusual because it presents what? It presents a positive, highly positive representation of a place which is normally represented like this. So if you look, these comes from Pixabay, which is typical of archives, image archives. They're going to have the most typical iconic representations of places. So if you put US-Mexico border into something like Pixabay, you're going to get something like that. Look at that image. What does it emphasize? The height of that, yeah? This sort of the separation. And here, with the image we saw of the volleyball, these two communities desperately trying to kind of come together despite the barrier. And this is the one from Wikipedia, also Creative Commons. This is the image you think on a neutral, well, supposedly neutral information-based website, you think, well, maybe they would find perhaps a more representative image than this. This image, again, sums up, at least to my mind, the extent of the wall, the side, and the difference between one side and the other. So that's an example, I think, of how we can address these issues, asking those kinds of questions. I think it's not just enough to say, what is this? Where are these people? What are they doing? How do you know? But how does it then, why is it surprising? How does it compare with others? And this is the central idea of, I think, one idea of encourage a global competence.
We can also ask the kids to do their own image searches with that task in mind, that you have to find the most different images that you can on the same subject. It can be absolutely anything, but it's just widening their base. So I know my son, when he's doing his homework, it's the first one I find on Google, that's fine, doesn't matter. It's like, no, you have to find 2, and they have to be different in at least 3 ways, and you have to be able to tell me what those 3 ways are and why, because you know what they're like.
Otherwise it's too
Teenagers
easy.
slip through your fingers if a task is too simple. So you have to pin them down.
And returning to Kip Cates, there's actually one quotation left from that seminal article. He then said, after outlining those, the skills, the knowledge, and the attitudes, he then says, the action is, the final aim of global education is to think globally and act locally. So then that would be my extension of that border task, looking at borders, is then to say to students, okay, as Ceri suggested, go find other examples of borders or other, very different ones. Anyone know where this border is? It's a border which is the opposite of a barrier. It's actually a bridge. This is between, that's right, between Copenhagen and Malmo, the bridge, the Øresund Bridge. And in local contexts, Ceri, this?
Okay, so this
thinking
picture, so taking the whole border issue very much locally for me, there's this image which I found very, very powerful. And you can actually, and sadly the link is underneath because we can't show the image without showing you the link.
I can show.
So it tells you the story. Yeah.
You want to see the story?
Okay, yeah. So this was an image, and many similar images were being shared on Facebook groups, local Facebook groups that I was following. And also they were in the paper and the kids saw them. And there's a very sad story behind this image. And it brings, again, it's borders. So my son's called Samuel, actually. And there was this Congolese boy, 6-year-old Congolese boy's dead body washed up on a local beach because our border is a border between continents, and it's a border where there are some very sad stories taking place. And the kids know this, and they need to process this as well. The local people really took this issue to heart and held a series of commemorative events on the beach where they threw carnations into the sea, and they keep washing up. So you're walking on the beach and there will be a little memory of this washed up at your feet, a drowned carnation. It's a very, very strong image. And if you think back again to the PISA global competences, empathy is one of the things that we are asked to develop. And generally, as educators, it's part of what we're helping teenagers to develop as their brain is developing to become more empathetic. Actually, physically, neurologically, their brains are developing to be able to understand someone else's point of view. So for me, for my kids at home, talking about this story was a very, very powerful way of being able to make local something that is also very global.
And in terms of global and local, of course, a global icon that has been in the news recently is the LGBT symbol, the rainbow flag. Does anyone know why it's been in the news recently? Because the guy who founded it died in San Francisco recently, and that was kind of a curiosity. Obviously, this is a global icon, but obviously in different local contexts, it's going to mean something completely different. Again, thanks to Torsten for this idea for this image. This is, in fact, a zebra crossing that's been repainted in the rainbow colors. This is actually outside the Russian embassy in Helsinki to protest against bans on homosexual propaganda, Russian bans. So again, very, very specific. You really need to have a lot of specific knowledge to unpack that image, to understand that image. And obviously that rainbow image is going to be very different in different contexts. It can simply mean, it can just be a sticker on the bar window saying that, or a hotel saying LGBT people are welcome here, or it could have very political ramifications like here. So I think another way, as I said at the beginning, of understanding this concept of embracing global competence is to go back to thinking of cultural content and how we address cultural content. In my case, in our case, when we create materials. And I think a convenient way of imagining this is to think of culture with a capital C and culture with a small c. In other words, what tends to happen often in materials is that culture is simply information-based. It's very difficult to therefore personalize or to localize, and it very often comes from an outsider's perspective. So it's very difficult for learners then to get a handle on it. It's very difficult for you then to create a project around it or to somehow make it relevant to the learner's needs. However, if we look at culture with a small c, we can see that this is, I'm hoping that some of the examples we've shown you today are doing that, treating culture with a small c. What we're attempting to do is to encourage reflection, understanding of this knowledge from an insider's perspective. And when I was asked to write a book, a course book called English Unlimited, I was asked to think of a topic for, this is the advanced level of English Unlimited, I was asked to think of a topic for the opening unit. And the topic that I thought of was born everywhere, raised in Britain. And this seems to me a very nice way to sort of sum up the talk, because this is very much culture from an insider's perspective. This is a photo journalist report that I found in the Guardian newspaper, found it online. I personally got in touch with the photographer. Basically, it's interviews with different kids, mainly teenagers, who were born in one country and raised in Britain. And what's lovely about this photo report are these little observations that the kids make about life, adapting to life in a new country. I don't know if you'll be able to read those, but what's very nice about these texts is the kind of poignancy that you get from these, these little kind of impressionistic notes about living in a new community. So, for example, we could look at the one from the Ivory Coast. In Africa, if you see anyone walking around, you just say hello. But in England, if you see anyone and say hello, they will not say hello back. They have to get to know you properly. When I arrived here, I was saying hello to everybody, but they wasn't answering me back. So I stopped. I tell myself there's no big deal me saying it again. Yeah. You know, this kind of, I find, and I've thought as well, for a C1 advanced course book, to give the voice to the learners, but to give the voice to these kinds of people was also a very kind of different approach, to let us hear their story. And then we can see how later we then localized and personalized that. Have you been in a situation where you've had to adapt to another country? How did you adapt? What difficulties did you have? And so on. Ceri?
So Ben's material was based on an article in The Guardian, and this is a much more up-to-date article in The Guardian, which is a lovely report on, I think it came out in December, so it was still 2016. So it was the babies born in the year 2000 celebrating their 16th birthdays. And this is exactly the age group which is being targeted by PISA and the global competences. And what this article gives, so it's just that thing of updating the material that we have in our books. Just have a look out there to see what there is. And this was a beautiful find because it's just kids from all over the world, short paragraph, talking about their 16th birthdays. And it's just so calling out to be used in class. And for the students to be able to just say, yeah, my 16th is not such a big deal either. Like this sweet 16 thing in the States, it doesn't happen here. In Spain, it's all about the communion and all the presents they get then, and so the big party. And in each country, it's slightly different. If you want to have a look, there's a very poignant story again from a boy in Syria whose 16th birthday party is going to be pretty different from what he might have thought a few years ago. So it's a lovely way in to just multiple perspectives, multiple stories, and really that's one of the best things that we can do to help our students open their minds, make connections, think of themselves as being members of a global community, not just the closed community of not only their classroom, but probably the clique of friends that they hang out with. And so here we are, to close.
With a quotation?
A quotation, yes. We thought, hey, quotations are the way to go. We loved the Galliano quotation this morning in the plenary for whoever was there. And this morning, the first session we went to, Kath Spills were also finished with a Groucho Marx quote. So we think maybe ours isn't quite at the same level. But here we go. Every learner has a distinct story to tell, and teaching culture is about constructing and hearing these stories. Thank you.
Thank you very much.